And now I'd like to welcome our panel of experts, all of whom have been fighting for environmental justice for many years. Kim Foreman is the Executive Director of Environmental Health Watch in Cleveland and has been active in environmental justice work for nearly 2 decades. Ben Pastor is the Lead Director of Energy Access and Equity at Fresh Energy, where he directs the nonprofit's work to advance equitable outcomes across Minnesota's energy system. But I need to congratulate him because he's leaving that job, and apparently, according to Twitter, he's going to the McKnight Foundation and joining their climate and energy team. So congrats on the new job. Sorry for the Fresh Energy folks, but hopefully everybody's happy in that. Jackie Patterson is the founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project, a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership. Previously, she served for 11 years as the senior director of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program. And finally, Adrianna Quintero is senior director of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the Energy Foundation. Adrianna is the founder of Voices Verde, one of the first organizations dedicated to building leadership among the Latinx community on sustainability. She also served on President Biden's Department of Energy transition team. It's really great to be with you. I can't imagine a better panel of people. We could solve all the problems on kind of climate and climate justice issues today between all 4 of you. But I want to have a serious discussion because when I think about this topic today and think about climate justice and how we get this right, I wonder if many Americans that are out there, and the majority of Americans, have this as a top-of-mind challenge because, we probably got there because it was not a top-of-mind challenge. And I just wonder, Kim Foreman, maybe where we should start is describing climate injustice. Give us an understanding, and I just want to read something to you that you said once. You said, look at any map. I don't care what you're talking about. From lead to asthma, environmental health issues to crime, to food deserts, it's all the same outline. And so I think it's maybe a useful starting place to talk about the legacy of climate injustice, and would love to kind of get a profile of that from all of you. So, Kim?
Hi, I think it's an injustice not to have folks impacted at the table at the beginning of a discussion to craft solutions, because those who are impacted by all of these issues, right? We don't segment the issues out there, living the experience every day and compounded, right? So they should be at the table. We're developing projects, policy, ideas, solutions. And that's an injustice, I think, to the families and the folks who experience these issues, and folks flying into their communities, telling them what they should do, what they should be a part of, or giving them a stipend, and educating folks on things they already know and experience and have expertise in. The lived experience is the most important experience. And I think part of the issues around how we approach people of color, poor people in communities, is unjust in itself. It's not just about issues, is the actual involvement of people, which is part of the definition of environmental justice. It's not just about polluters or out the
That's very helpful. And Jacky, I'd love to get the snapshot from you, but I want to add one layer to it, is that you tweeted out the NAACP's recent report, and it was called Nuts, Bolts, and Pitfalls of Carbon Pricing, an equity-based primer on paying to pollute. And one of the points of it was that this carbon pricing stuff that we're talking about, which we're not even at yet, actually doesn't solve the problems, which was something new that I hadn't thought about before, to be candid. Because when you kind of look at, okay, how do we achieve, carbon limits and climate targets, and what we're also talking about is how do you make this social and civic justice element also fit? And you said we can run the risk of actually doing things that may approach the climate, which aggravate the social justice and distance. Am I getting that right?
Yes, definitely. So thank you for that. Thank you for looking at that report. It's always good to know people are reading. So so that's exactly it. Too often we engage in solutions that appear that we're only looking through one lens at the issue. And so as Kim was saying, and as quote from Audre Lorde where she says, we don't we don't live, we can't, let's say, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives. And similarly, when we think about solutions, we have to think about them in terms of what they're solving for and what they actually might be creating on the other side. And it's only through engaging frontline communities who actually are where we're all living. Where none of us live single issue lives, but communities who are on the front lines who experience the impacts that Kim has talked about of climate change and of environmental injustice are uniquely situated to be able to both talk about what the solutions are, as well as talk about unintended consequences for solutions that people raise through a myopic lens. So that's a little short.
Yeah, no, there's so much here that we could go into in this, and I want to go into with all of you. But Ben, Fresh Energy, and I know you're leaving, but I mean, it sounds like this is an attempt with an independent nonprofit to go to Kim and Jackie's point to get those that are impacted at the table with utilities and with energy providers, so that there is at least a dialogue or discussion awareness. And I'd love to know if the model works, right? Are you there as a fig leaf? Are you there actually achieving something that you feel is substantial?
Thanks, Steve, and thanks for your kind words. And just so happy to be here as part of this panel, and on behalf of Fresh Energy, actually staying in my current role for another month. So definitely still very much in it. I think in terms of our philosophy and what we try to do in our work, I think just to go back to Kim's earlier point, those maps are not a mistake. And I think one thing to really note right out of the outset is, I think throughout history, in times of transformational change, communities have been harmed or left behind either through malicious intent or the lack of intentionality. From the transportation sector and the construction of the federal interstate highway system that disproportionately impacted under-resourced communities and communities of color. In the housing sector, redlining disproportionately harmed, otherwise well-off communities of color, and really, I think segmented them into communities that we still see today. And so, as a policy organization, I think we have not just an opportunity, but an obligation to think about this transition, this huge energy transition, and how we are bringing communities along, not just as an afterthought, but as an inherent part of the process. So we really try to, bring that perspective to the processes that we are involved in, whether it's utility energy efficiency programs or the development of renewable energy policy. And I think importantly, really try to partner directly with community-based organizations, including folks who are, more well-versed on environmental justice, renter advocacy groups, and others, to really, leverage our power and privilege to bring them into the process and help them, speak directly to decision makers and others to really influence where our energy transition is going.
Now you're in, if I have it right, you're in St. Paul. Am I wrong on that?
That's correct.
And is it working?
That's a good question. I think, what I would say right off the bat is that this is a journey. And, I think I've heard a number of times, we can't really point to a time in U.S. history where there's been an equitable transition, right? And so I think we're really trying to think about how do we change these systems and these structures that have been built in a certain way. And so, I think we've seen signs of progress. We've recently passed legislation with our energy efficiency framework here in Minnesota that's going to have significant impacts and benefits for under-resourced households. And that was shaped with some of our community-based organizations, at the table and providing recommendations on that policy development. But I think we have a long way to go, and we really want to make sure that we're thinking about an equitable, just transition in Minnesota and across the U.S.
Well, thank you for that. And Adrianna, I'd love you to respond too on this question of your depiction of climate injustice. But, I also just want to pay credit to you because, I know that your work on thinking about diversity and inclusion, this is in the last 2 years become such a big issue because we've seen what the pandemic has done. We've seen what the economy has done. We've seen what the stress over racial divisions and just, inequality in the country has just become, this bleeding ulcer and very evident in the country, right? So I've wondered, is there going to be a time where actually we're going to be responding credibly on these fronts, or is this going to fade away like so many other times, and 2 years from now we will have just stuck our heads in the sand again? So I guess as I ask you about this, And with your work with the Energy Foundation, have you found a model? I mean, one of the things I think these programs are supposed to do is, are there replicable models where your work becomes easily copied by others? So what are your thoughts?
Great questions. And I'll point to everyone who has participated in this event as the models. This can't and should never be considered a trend or a passing fad. This is long overdue. As Ben just said, we don't have models because we truly have never seen this done well in our country. Inequity and the history of oppression and discrimination is there. And this is a really important moment where we have things coming together to truly keep this elevated and buoyed. And I think that as Peggy Shepard from WEAC just mentioned a few minutes ago, Justice 40 is one of those really important tools. And it really is based in a recognition that we have a history of discrimination and oppression that we need to very intentionally create policies against. And this is not something that's just going to happen coincidentally as an add-on. We need to be very intentional. And the models that WEAC, that Jacky has done throughout her career, that Ben and Fresh Energy have done, that Kim is moving forward, all of these and so many more that live in communities exist. We simply haven't been looking for them because the air has been taken out of the room by these large organizations who have done good work, but who have historically completely neglected and excluded the community voice and the community perspective, and the true knowledge of what one wants lives with our experience. I believe Kim said that very well. That is where our wisdom truly comes from. And I think what we're seeing now is a realization that that is where we need to really invest, and we need to put our energy in working with and alongside from the minute that the projects begin or beforehand, centering and elevating the needs of communities, the expertise that exists, even if it doesn't look like a diploma from some Ivy League university, that doesn't matter. What matters is the experience and the knowledge that's been gained living there, because that is truly where we're going to find the gains that have so long just eluded us. Where I think foundations, and I'm so glad that Ben is going to Foundation, fantastic. I look forward to working with you. What we can do is really invest and support the work that is going to be done at the federal level, at the state level. Even if we do our best at the federal level with Justice 40, the program is going to require groups on the ground and those to be funded and to be supported to make sure that the money goes where it's most needed. And I'm incredibly optimistic as to what can happen because of the energy that exists. We have to keep that going because we've spent, hundreds of years getting here, right, and we need to invest the time and money in getting out of here.
Well, let me go to all of you and go back to Kim and Jacky to start with, but I don't know. I mean, I've been doing a variety of programs on this front, and one recently supported by the Environmental Defense Fund, as I mentioned with Brenda Mallory, about electronic vehicles, and I interviewed Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, who's been trying to work on some of these same questions of neglected, underserved, communities that have just been carrying the burden of climate disaster, if you will. I'm probably saying this all wrong, but trying to do it. And I guess the question is, I've heard for the first time about this Justice 40 initiative. Does that begin tilting us in the right direction, or do you think that is, I have this worry that sometimes we get caught up in fads, and I just wonder if they're real. But Kim, is Justice 40 a start for you, and how much more do we need to do?
Right. So I think every conversation, everything is a great start. The question is application, right? So we get these documents, we get these proposals, we get the conversations. Now, how do we transition to application and looking at resources, looking at budgets, right? Where do the dollars go and what impact is it going to make, and make sure we're not just reverting back to programs, and also not just listing out what we think sounds good, but how are we really evaluating what's happening on the ground in a real way and not just lean on gatekeepers to tell us the story. Right. We have to dig deeper. And like Adrianna said, to be intentional. Every day is an evaluation.
So,
We don't wait 2 years later to evaluate whether it's worked or not. We're
right.
going to constantly ask the question.
Jackie, I'm going to say something nice about our supporters today, the Climate Action Campaign, because they really care about this issue, and I'm glad they do. And as I've just been listening to all of you and thinking about, the conversation we heard with those during the sponsored content session, I'm just sort of asking myself, how do you take the communities we're talking about them and make them winners and not losers? So, and is climate action, how do I put this? Is climate action something that, to a certain degree, the Black and brown communities can embrace and they can see themselves being wired in with a better social contract rather than distrusting and seeing themselves as victims again? So how do we get that going the right way, Jackie?
Yes, thank you. So first we have to think about so too often what we find is there's a recent campaign around one of these pipelines, and a number of environmental organizations converged on a community, and so there was a lot of action around that, supporting that community and fighting the pipeline. And then afterwards, what is the relationship with that community? What were the circumstances that made that community vulnerable in the first place to the various things that are trying to be put there? And why? And how can we think about, again, holistic ways of addressing issues so that we don't instrumentalize communities towards aims that are predetermined by someone outside of the community, and B, that we actually aren't kind of making sure that we're working in partnership with communities towards self-determination. So instead of coming in and telling the community that they need to care about this, which they do, and they'll take action on it, coming in and saying, all right, what are the things that you're concerned about? What are the things that we have in common that we're trying to achieve? And how can we work together to capacitate self-determination leadership, and so the communities aren't always in the situation where things are happening to communities as opposed to communities actually being in the driver's seat. And so that's the kind of approach and analysis that we need to have as we're engaging with communities to ensure that we aren't continuing to just see communities in a single dimensional way.
Right. And Adrianna and Ben and all of you, I'll get you all in this. The Biden administration, I've talked to Gina McCarthy, a climate advisor, Brenda Mallory, chair of the White House Council of Environmental Advisors, et cetera. And you sort of feel that there's all this action going on. I'd love your insights from your perspective in the NGO community of how can they better succeed. I assume all of you kind of like the tilt of this crowd. Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong. But how would they actually get more traction? And if you were sitting down with the president and his advisors and you wanted to give them a piece of advice on how to move the needle on climate and social justice, what would be the 2 or 3 things you might say quickly? Adrianna?
Yeah, so I would say that we're on the right track.
And I know, Adrianna, you did this for them, right? So,
yeah.
Are they listening to you? Are they listening to you?
I mean, one of the things that I would point out is that we are, this actually goes beyond the communities that we're talking about here. Uh-huh. What we forget, and what I think we need to keep saying, and this is why it's not a fad, is that as we invest in our Black and brown communities and in our communities that have been historically oppressed and disinvested in, we are actually going to improve everyone's lives because the impacts are going to benefit us. We're going to be creating jobs. We're going to be lifting people out of poverty. We're going to be investing in our economy, frankly, and that is what I think we often neglect in this conversation, is the fact that an investment in our communities and removing this layer of historical oppression, we're actually raising the bar for everybody, and we're raising all boats, as that saying goes. So I think that is what I would emphasize, and we need to continue to talk about how this does that. I think they're doing an excellent job, and it always bears repeating.
Ben, if you were going to give them a friendly critique and say, hey, this is how you can amp up what you're trying to do, what would it be?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. I know we've talked about the Justice 40 initiative quite a bit already today. I think, keeping in mind that, equity is not just about the benefits or outcomes that accrue, but about engaging folks in the process, as we've talked about through this conversation. I think it's going to be really critical as the Biden administration moves forward with Justice 40 to ensure that community members, impacted folks, and really just, folks across the spectrum are included in that conversation. I also, I know, Steve, that you mentioned a few of the folks within the administration that you've been speaking with. I think I'm really excited about the Deputy Director of Energy Justice, Shalonda Baker, and Dr. Tony Reams, who are now, at the Department of Energy, really helping to craft and move forward with that Justice 40 initiative. I think they're also actively thinking about what are the metrics for success? How are we actually tracking data and the outcomes to make sure that we're moving forward with the commitments that we've made? And so I think just really leaning on that leadership is going to be really critical. And then more broadly across the policy spectrum, I think moving forward with ambitious policy ideas like a clean electricity standard and ensuring that those family supporting jobs that would be created by such a clean electricity standard are really equitably reaching communities. But there's a lot to be excited about. I think it's just a matter of getting it across the finish line.
Well, we have a great question for our audience in a second, but I want to get Jacky and Kim to tell us, because I really want to hear I want to have the Biden team. I'm sure someone up there is listening. What do you think they could do to increase the efficacy of these efforts on climate and justice? Kim?
I think that as we work with communities that have been disinvested in, the trust building is important. The time it takes to build the trust, to then get at the conversation, to hear solutions that they actually believe you care. Then on practical applications through housing, through food, things that in health, making health the center, so we're not caught up in these technical conversations that just go over the head of folks versus being real clear about what they experience, how we discuss it, and how we wrap climate and economic justice around these practical issues that they're dealing with every day, and then move towards solutions that have already been vetted or researched that work and scale them, but also do it differently this time.
Great. Jacky, quick thoughts?
Yeah, sure. We have to build competencies in reaching communities. As federal, when FERC had their Office of Public Participation that they're starting, and they had this consultative conversations, one of the key things that we were bringing to them is that they need to be better about. So many communities don't even know that FERC exists, much less what are the pathways to actually give input, much less how to even examine the various things that are being considered by FERC. And so that's just an example, and there's so many more, the Public Service Commission, Public Utilities Commission, and certainly the various programs and processes of the federal government. So we need to make sure that we're building those pathways, and not just to communities writ large, because even as we talk about disadvantaged communities in Justice 40, often we even then are kind of reaching the communities that have broadband, that have some institution that's tied in with the federal government already. We have to reach those communities that are not even on the map, that are not even on the margins at all, because they're just invisible to some, and these are the communities that we often find.
I'm so glad you've said that, because I'm kind of constantly seeing these cases where there are well-intentioned resources in certain places, and that surround sound goes out to like limited parts of the country, and then other parts of the country really know nothing. They're not connected in that, and that's why I think what all of you are doing is so important. We got a great question from Christina, and I can't wait for it. Christina?
Hi, my name is Christina Miri Rajan. I'm a primary student from GEMS Millennium School, Sharjah, UAE. It's a great privilege to be part of this energy efficiency and climate justice virtual event and to hear from many of the experts. My question is, how can the students take the most effective climate actions during this pandemic, even being in their limited surroundings?
So this is a first for us. This is a great question from a young student in Sharjah, UAE, asking what students could do. So, Jacky.
Yes, so I'll just point to what students are already doing. Students are doing some amazing, whether it's their digital campaigns to spread the word and really shift the narrative around what's possible and what's necessary and what's the audacious actions that we need to take. And students are in their localities, as we say, we're locked in certain places, but in other places, we are people are getting out there in outdoor ways of whether they're doing community cleanups or they're doing rallies in their communities. There's all these different ways, planting community gardens that are critical in the food insecurity that we're finding in COVID-19, but also critical to advancing climate change mitigation. And so I'll just stop there.
Ben, your thoughts?
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. I think in addition to what Jackie mentioned, just continuing to learn and also having conversations. I think if there's anything that we know from, groups like the Sunrise Movement and others, it's that folks listen to young people. And I think that couldn't be, more true in family settings. And so I think if young people are learning about climate change, learning about the potential of this clean energy transition and sharing it with their family, sharing it with, others in their classes or their teachers, that really helps influence, where we're able to go. And I think can help change hearts and minds and really get everyone on the same path toward this clean energy transition.
Adrianna?
Absolutely agree with Ben and Jackie. And it's the energy that children can bring to this is critical. Not only can they get outside and influence their parents, which is hugely important, but they are going to be designing the solutions of the future. So I think the best thing they can do is help us to make sure that this is not a fad, that we continue to talk about the importance of centering the needs of communities and looking towards the future. So I think that they can set an example. They don't see the same, at least here in the US, what we see is a move towards a much more diverse, much more inclusive model of activism than what we've seen in the past. And I think that they can bring that level of elevating the intersectionality between racial discrimination, gender discrimination, and climate injustice together in a way that we have not seen before. And I'm very excited about what the young people of the world, frankly, are able to do with that. So keep it up and remind us of the fact that these all go together, that to solve them all, solve one starts to solve the others.
Thank you for that. I'm going to give the last word to Kim Foreman, but I'm going to say to Christina that I think if I'm counting right, it's about 11 p.m. there. So I hope your parents have let you stay up to watch this or that you watch it later. So Kim, last word.
Yeah, I've tried to model intergenerational and multi-sector teams to develop solutions so that we hear from everyone, we respect everyone, and don't separate them out, but bring them together. So you have all ages, some diversity around age, race, all of the and sector, so that we are all together crafting solutions. So I think it's important to include other generations and people. Look around the table. If there's someone there that's missing, being intentional of inviting them to the table to plan and participate.
And what I will say, just as the moderator to this, to Christina and to young people out there, is let everybody know around you, teachers, parents, companies, organizations, you have a role, you have a voice, that these issues matter. And that, I have to tell you that one of the things that may not be appropriate, because when you actually scratch beneath the surface on all the things you're talking about, Flint, Michigan, and what we saw with the water crisis there is something that is all over. What you're talking about is such a much broader swath of climate injustice. But for a lot of Americans, that was one they got in their head. They remember it was, one in the, but that is everywhere. And so, when you kind of look at the actions, the social action that occurred around that and the huge lift, well, I don't think it should have been that hard, but it was. I think young people can play a very big role in saying this stuff matters. So thank you so much for that great question. I want to thank Kim Foreman, Executive Director of Environmental Health Watch. Thank you so much. Ben Passer, Lead Director on Energy Access and Equity at Fresh Energy. Jacqueline Patterson, Jacky Patterson, Founder and Executive Director of the Chisholm Legacy Project. And finally, Adrianna Quintero, who is Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Energy Foundation. Thank you all so much. Great conversation. Well, that brings us to the end of our program today. A big thank you to Climate Action Campaign and to all of you attendees for joining this discussion. If you missed any of these conversations, and they're great, we will have the video up from the event on our website shortly. I'm Steve Clemons. Think about the climate. Be well.